Morning.
Good morning.
We're going to start now. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 160170, 160171, 160172, and resolutions number 160180. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 160170, an ordinance to adopt the capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2017 through 2022 inclusive. Bill number 160171, an ordinance to adopt the fiscal 2017 capital budget. Bill number 160172, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2017. Resolution number 160180, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia for a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2017 through 2021 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2016, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk, that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2017, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2017 through fiscal 2022. Today we will hear testimony from the following departments, the City Controller's Office and the Sheriff's Office. We are ready to start. Mr.
Good morning.
Stitt, wait a minute. First person to testify. I understand you being anxious. I know how people love coming in here to testify. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify is
City Controller Alan Butkovitz.
Thank you very much. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr.
Good morning
President.
to your team. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
I'm City Controller Alan Butkovitz. I'm joined by Deputy City Controllers Bill Rubin, Gerry Micciulla, and John Thomas, as well as our Administrative Services Director Andrea Rose and Audit Director and transitioning to Post-Audit Deputy Christy Brady. The Mayor's proposed fiscal year 2017 operating budget for the City Controller's Office includes a general fund appropriation of $8,431,962. I would like to once again this year publicly thank all of our employees who continue to provide quality needed service to the citizens of Philadelphia. They are to be commended and congratulated. My post-audit division performed and produced its annual auditor's report, which encompassed an audit of all 42 city departments. In addition, post-audit completed the following: 3 performance audits, including the follow-up of licenses and inspections, Fire Department response times, and Philacor, the inmate trades program. 4 opinions on the financial statements of the city and the school district of Philadelphia. 2 reports on internal controls related to the 4 opinion audits. 12 grant-related audit reports, and an opinion on the city's 5-year forecasted statements for fiscal year 2016 to 2020. From the audits and reports I just listed, we made a total of 245 recommendations to safeguard city and school district assets, enhance financial management, strengthen internal accounting controls, and improve economies and efficiencies. In all, my post-audit division identified financial reporting errors, compliance deficiencies, cost reductions, and increased revenues totaling more than $2.2 billion. Our pre-audit division provides oversight of the city's payment and purchasing processes. Pre-audit monitors, reviews, and approves or disapproves all requisitions for payment of city funds and responds to daily requests for information regarding vendor payments. This division processed more than 300,000 payment vouchers representing more than $4.8 billion in expenditures. The pre-audit division also conducted several important investigations and audits, including a follow-up review of the conditions of Philadelphia's public school buildings that uncovered several hazardous conditions at selected schools, including exposed asbestos, electrical and fire dangers, and water damage. Most recently, our pre-audit division, in conjunction with the office's Finance and Policy Unit, conducted a review on the status of the city's diversity and inclusion program and the efficacy of changes implemented over the past 7 years. As a result of this review, the Controller's Office made several recommendations regarding contract monitoring and enforcement, reporting participation results, developing a local mentor-protege program, establishing a pre-apprenticeship program, and the certification process. Based on reviews and recommendations from pre-audit, 3 of the 4 city departments that administer capital projects have invited our technical staff to conduct workshops for their project inspectors and managers to encourage cost savings and to increase accuracy and efficiency in billings and inspections. The Fraud and Special Investigations Division completed 81 cases over the last year, including contract fraud, misuse of city equipment, timekeeping fraud, employee misconduct, and residency violations. The unit was heavily involved in our ongoing assessments of L&I's operations and their imminently dangerous building program, and the most recent assessment of the Revenue Department's mail center operations. The Finance and Policy Division continued its efforts to evaluate the economic climate of our city, as well as work with the public and private sector to identify opportunities that can build job growth. This included the following: continuing the work with the Anchor Procurement Initiative, which laid out a roadmap for boosting job growth, particularly in manufacturing. Our report influenced the national discussion on anchor procurement by pointing out the critical role of supply chain integrators like Aramark and Office Depot. Since January, we have been actively partnering with the Commerce Department on implementing this initiative. Conducted an economic impact statement for the Market East Tax Increment Financing, TIF project. The report concurred with PIDC's contention that the TIF for the proposed renovation of the gallery makes economic sense, and it also raised questions about the applicability of the city's Minimum Wage Standards Act to tenants. Performed a study of Southport's economic potential, which concluded that developing the land for the use of auto containers and or liquid natural gas would produce new jobs. Analyzed the economic impact of the business community's reaction to the papal visit, which led to a number of recommendations for the city to consider when hosting large events. All of these reports were models of data-driven policy analysis that we believe can help our city make better decisions on how to allocate scarce resources and adopt policies that show real results for our local economy. In addition, we continued our efforts to promote financial literacy for Philadelphians of all ages. We distributed financial resource booklets to every school and have been providing Money Smart cards to the 12,000 12th graders. With the help of City Council and the School District of Philadelphia, we greatly expanded our reach this year to provide free resources to as many educators, parents, and youth as possible. We look forward to working with City Council as it moves forward with examining the possibility of providing financial education courses in the classroom. Our work with youth over the last year was expanded to our newly created Youth Mentor Program. Students work with our staff to conduct an audit of an issue or topic that the students find important to their daily lives while having the opportunity to work in a professional environment and to learn about career paths. The students have produced exciting findings. One report found a lack of transparency over the lunch program, and another report examined crime at recreation centers with surveillance cameras. I will continue working on issues and solutions to make Philadelphia a better place for those who live and work here. And most importantly, I will continue to find more revenues that are owed the city and identify performance and management efficiencies throughout city government so we can have the added resources needed to fund the programs that provide necessary city services. I appreciate this opportunity to present testimony, and I thank Council President Clark and the members of City Council for your cooperation and support. I look forward to working with you in the coming year. My staff and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Controller. I have a question. Page 1 of your testimony, you state that your post-audit division identified financial reporting errors, compliance deficiencies, cost reductions, and increased revenues totaling more than $2.2 billion. First part 1A is, does that include the school district? And second, can you detail where your team found the most cost reduction and increased revenue opportunities within the city departments?
I guess Gerry Micciulla.
Okay. My name is Gerry Micciulla. I'm the post-audit deputy city controller. The answer to your first question was yes, it does include the school district. A lot of those included in that $2.2 billion amount are a lot of mistakes that we find in the preparation of both the school district financial statements and the City of Philadelphia financial statements. In terms of the second question, I think we need to probably do a better job of trying to collect some of the revenues that are out there that have been uncollected. I think we've improved some areas of some in collection. From what I know, collection of EMS receivables, for example. So I think there's still more work that can be done in the area of collecting some receivables that are out there.
Okay. So 2.2 billion is a significant number. I
Yes,
think
it
we
is.
all agree. So I guess what I'm trying to determine is how much of that 2.2 billion is related to revenues or cost savings?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact amount that would be related to revenue. I believe, though, that a lot of it has to do more with the expenditure side, errors that we find in reporting expenditure amounts.
So it's
Okay.
not-
But I certainly could go back and I certainly can isolate how much of that $2.2 billion pertain to the revenue side.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we are fortunate enough to find revenues beyond the projected amount, we like to know about it.
Right.
It's rare, but when in fact we do see something like that happening, we would hope that maybe it's not an anomaly, maybe it's something that can continue to reoccur as it relates to our ability to identify additional revenues. As the controller said, that's a significant part of what he would like to do with this office. All right.
Yeah, but I can't, yeah, here it is, but I can't isolate which of these deal with revenue.
Good morning, Controller,
Good morning.
and thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your team and your post-audit due diligence as you do. And I got to tell you, over the years, I've watched you closely in your career, and we have a jovial kind of relationship, both personally and professionally. And we always say that you speak truth to power. And I think some of your audits certainly indicate that you're doing the right thing for the citizens of the city of Philadelphia. I just want to add a question, and I know this is the post-audit regarding the school district. I mean, $2.2 billion is a tremendous amount of money to be...
Well, it's not $2.2 billion in cash. The vast
Right.
majority of that are corrections to accounting classifications. So there are...
I just want to be clear, right? Because, just reading the testimony, and I just want to make sure that you're not saying that there's $2.2 billion in...
in cash.
No.
Inappropriate or...
No.
Erred in wrong expenditures or, lost, can't find.
Most of it has to do with accounting errors. The school district, the errors at the school district, if my memory serves me correctly, were about 6.2 billion or $2 million. I'm sorry. Okay.
Can you give them an example?
They might accrue an expenditure incorrectly this year. For example, there might be a problem. We examine payables every year, so it's pretty much just a timing difference. They picked up the expenditure in the wrong year. All right, but that requires an adjustment to the financial statements. Otherwise, they will be incorrect. So it's just not a matter of.
Has the school district responded to your post audit?
Yes. Oh, no, they haven't done so yet. Okay, we're in the process of finalizing the what we call the letter of internal control, which will probably be sent to them later this week. Okay. Generally, though, in terms of those dollar amounts that we find in the statements, they will make the adjustments to the financial statements. Otherwise, we would have to issue an opinion that would not be it would not be what we call a clean opinion. Okay, we'd have to take exception. So they will, especially if there are dollars that are material to the financial statements, they will have to make those adjustments, or we would have to issue perhaps a qualified opinion.
Okay, and are you asking them to respond within a certain time to make
When they
the
get, when they get
accounting
when they get our letter of internal control, yes, they will be given a certain period of time. Generally, we have what we refer to as an exit conference. The exit conference is generally about a week after we send them a copy of the report. The report deals with different weaknesses we find in their procedures that we think management has to make some changes. All right. So after we have our exit conference, we generally give them another week to formally respond to the report, and we put their response in our report.
Okay, great. And would you expect their due diligence response to be in a timely manner, like while the budget process is taking place here in City Council?
I believe so. I think it will be. Okay. I don't see why not.
Okay, so I mean, I think council will be in communication with the controller's office. Maybe we can get a call back on the responses. All right, so I appreciate it, Tom. I have, and then before I turn it over, Mr. Controller, you had a report and press conference and made some suggestions about the pensions and the buyouts with some 31,000 beneficiaries of the city pensions fund. Has there been a finalized actuary report on the projected costs and the savings of these buyouts?
No.
All right. Can we accurately project how many people would take the buyouts? I mean, assume that people would be interested?
I think there's going to be a number of steps, which the first step is going to be an analysis by the actuary of the costs and of possible savings. And there are at least two parts to this. Number one, the question of if everybody in the city pension system accepted a 50% or 70% buyout, what would that mean to our unfunded liability, right? And the early indications are that there would have to be at least 80% of the pensioners would have to agree to it for it to make any financial sense to the city. And if they did, the city could virtually rid itself of the unfunded liability for about $6 billion. So, which is, I guess, they could pay off the entire pension for $6 billion as opposed to about $11 billion right now. I mean, I have no optimism that you'd get that kind of response from city workers. The second proposal, which has more legs, has more possibility, is a little more complicated, and that involves getting the people who are still active under the 1967 plans to agree to accept the benefits that are provided to all city workers under the 87 plans. And that would yield something in we don't have the actuarial numbers, so these are very ballpark policy analysis figures, but it would reduce the average annual pension from about $39,000 to $34,000 and would yield maybe a $50,000 lump sum to the city workers who opted in for making that choice. So that could save somewhere in the vicinity of $200 million, which it is not anywhere near as dramatic an impact as if everybody bought into it, but it's substantial money, and it points in a direction of trying to accomplish these changes through agreement rather than through ultimatum to the unionized workers, which was unfortunately kind of a standard reaction in the prior administration. So
in roughly in the 67 plan, we got between 4,000 active members?
About 2,500, 2,700.
Okay. Well, thank you. I have several follow-up pension questions, but the chair would like to recognize Councilman Dunn.
Thank you, Councilman Heenan, and good morning.
Good morning.
Just a couple quick questions. Your total is $2.2 billion of initiatives that you've outlined, basically, that could help the city, roughly?
Well, those are mostly financial reporting errors. Those are not cash
Okay.
losses.
So of the cash, of the potential, you've had a lot of ideas that produce a lot of savings. I guess over the last 3, 4, 5 years, what do you think the total is of those ideas that you had developed from the controller's office?
Well, we've reported something like $600 or $800 million, and we've done a quick analysis of about $400 million in mostly collection areas. Unpaid water and sewer bills, $132 million. Court fines, uncollected court fines and fees, $70 million. Trash, false alarm fines, uncollected, $70 million. Enhanced demolition building, $20 million. The city sometimes demolishes buildings and doesn't bother to bill the owner. Excess sheriff fees, $7.4 million. Police services that we provide for private auto showrooms and sporting events, $5 million. Tax amnesty program, which was successful, $72 million. And increased EMS billing charges, $27.5 million. And employee withholding, $3 million. Of that figure, about $115 million was successfully implemented. I would say most of it in the tax amnesty program. So that's about 28% of those items.
How much of that is one time, and how much of that is recurring on an annual basis?
The items that I just listed are all cumulative. They're not the rescue squad costs would provide a recurring stream of revenue every year. We had a lot of conflict with the Nutter administration over it for many years. We indicated there was something like $25 million to be recovered by doing things like correctly getting people's social security numbers and by changing the vendor. And they kind of begrudgingly listed $1 million as a potential revenue, and then towards the end of the administration, they accepted our number. But that was the largest operational savings we were able to identify.
And why do you think, in your opinion, these savings haven't been attacked? Why haven't we not gone after all these different items?
Well, there's kind of the Philadelphia approach of we've always done it this way, so we always want to do it that way. And there was an unfortunate dynamic that developed during the Nutter administration, which was any kind of, I'm sure people in council are familiar with it, any kind of initiative that came from outside the administration was simply rejected out of hand because it became very public relations dominated rather than operationally dominated.
So, but now we have a new mayor, we have a new administration, we have a new attitude. Is there a way to resurrect these ideas with the new administration?
Yeah, and I think the mayor has been very, very open to new ideas and very willing to share ideas and to use the pencil, the eraser and the pencil and go over it. I think he's very refreshingly open to that. And for example, in the fire department, I mean, he very quickly embraced the findings that we made in the fire department. You know, there's an ironic situation. There was all that conflict over the last 8 years about brownouts. And the stated rationale for it was that it was going to save money, that they were going to save $4 million a year. And then within 6 months of the initiation of it, we pointed out that they were about minus $3 million, that they were losing money on overtime and other costs. And it turns out over the life of that program, they lost $20 million. So how do you manage to do something where you combine, you both jeopardize public safety, you make it harder for fire engines to get to their target on time, and you manage to lose money on it? And that was apparent in the way the numbers were coming in within months after the initiative was announced. And the answer is, if you're committed to a public relations strategy where you throw your hat over the fence and then you stubbornly defend everything that you do, and you're not open to operational reality, that's where you end up.
Let me ask you a question, because I'm coming from a different viewpoint from the private world. In the private world, the head of a company would call you in with whoever it applies to, whether it's revenue or finance, and sit down with you and say, listen, we have a potential to save or collect $100 million. Do you guys agree? How do we get this done? How do we move forward? Why can't that happen here?
Well, sometimes it's because the city is not willing or able to invest what's necessary in order to so it happened with the creation of the 311 program, which was said that it was going to be like New York's program, but then the investment was a fraction of what was necessary for it. Recently, we've talked about the computerization on L&I, where the computer programming that was promised had a price tag of $7.5 million eclipse, and the city only put in $4.5 million. And then the policy pronouncements expect the same results as if the information, we have primitive information technology here. One of my most unfavorite examples is the house in Philadelphia that regularly gets a bill for something, I forget whether it's $40,000 a month or $200,000 a month, and there is no way for water revenue to correct it. So they just know that that's a problem, and they take a pen and they cross it out every month. It's incomprehensible to me that we don't have the capacity in our data system to, after we know about that, to change that. And there are reams of problems like that in the sheriff's office. If you had to rely on the database to tell you who owes what and what's the status of things, you can't do it. You really need institutional memory. You need people who are familiar with what kinds of errors are in that system. And that, nobody in business functions like that in 2016.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Controller. Let me start, and I want to go back to the subject that you touched on a little earlier. And just bear with me. I don't usually sound like a husky Viking every day, but this thing is taking the best of my voice. The issue associated with buyout. So one, I wanted to commend you for even attempting to offer a solution. $5.7 billion of unfunded liability, $5 billion of that attributed to Plan 67, laws, courts, precedent saying that we can't do anything to address those currently receiving benefits. So municipalities across the country find themselves like strapped trying to find an answer. So I wanted you to go back and delve into your response when you mention a potential option versus everyone thinking when you first talked about this idea that all of those currently receiving benefits under Plan 67 would receive a buyout. And we're just talking about what it would look like. You just described that potentially those who are still active contributors in Plan 67 and how that could roll out. Does that option that you just referenced have anything to do with the IRS and the U.S. Treasury's ruling regarding Notice 2015-49, where they actually prohibited the private sector from being able to offer lump sum sort of buyouts as a de-risking strategy for the fund? Because at first people would look and say, okay, yeah, this is a potential option. Treasury and IRS get together and say, private sector, no, you can't do this. The second option, is that more in line with that, or did that ruling have anything to do with your coming up with that rationale?
No, the IRS rulings don't apply to municipal plans. They apply to ERISA plans, which are private plans. So we exist under state law, and we don't have that restriction.
So I am not suggesting that our plan falls under their rules and guidelines. I'm suggesting that the methodology and the rationale behind their ruling, I'm asking, did that have anything to do with the concept that you just described? I'm not suggesting that we're governed the same.
No, there was an active discussion in the pension board, and actually one of the other trustees I think had an improvement on my initial question. My initial question had to do with how we could affect the unfunded liability if the buyout option was offered to everybody in the plan. And that's the one that would involve a lot of money. But on the other hand, there's a lot of concern that people would sell their birthright for half or three-quarters of what it's worth, and that when they got old, they wouldn't have any money to live on. So the discussion, on the other hand, there has been a series of reforms by this council over the years. So going back actually to Mayor Good's tenure, which is when the 87 plan was instituted, and then there is a consensus view that the benefits that the city pays to current employees are humane and enough to live on. So if you can live on 87 benefits, it's kind of a bonus to have benefits that are more generous than that. And if the workers in that plan feel that they have a need to acquire $50,000 right now to do something that they need, it's one thing to have money on a monthly basis to pay your rent and your food, but that doesn't necessarily mean people are able to amass $50,000 or $70,000 when they need it, when there's some major life event. So that second plan could accommodate both requirements. It wouldn't be shoved down anybody's throat. It would involve city workers having to agree by a large majority that they want to see the program, and it would involve choices by city workers to accept that option. Because constitutionally, as you know, and there's been an awful lot of battling about taking away defined benefit pensions and doing things to workers, and you know, these are property rights that those workers earned and are constitutionally protected. So that's the way that it would have to be approached.
Well, let me just say this to you, Mr. Controller. One, again, I thank you for attempting to make a recommendation that could be a potential solution to something that I think we all agree is a major crisis facing the city of Philadelphia. I know that Councilman Derek Green has introduced a resolution calling for hearings on this issue. I want you to know that the state of retirement security in the city of Philadelphia, and you and I have had conversation about this, is something of grave importance to me, and I look forward to working with you in a collaborative manner in the future so that we can come up with some potential solutions that can help the people in our city.
You have quite an impressive record of working in the vineyard on this during your years in the state legislature, and Councilman Derek Green, Councilman Heenan, Councilman Dom, just about every member of the council has recognized both the need to make the pension costs affordable while paying attention to what's going to be a burgeoning unmet need as people live longer and longer without sufficient money to remain active in the economy, to have the kind of life they've become adjusted to. And I really am impressed to see the level of intellectual activity and interest on such a large number of council members, including yourself, on what I think is going to be one of the leading problems over the next decade.
Thank you, Mr. Controller. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Councilman Heenan. Mr. Controller, good morning.
Good morning.
Wanted to follow up on some questions that the Council President and Councilman Heenan asked in reference to the school district. In reference to the information you provided in your testimony, that detail, that $2.2 billion, that was not based on a performance audit, that was based on a review or opinion on their financial information?
That's the financial audit, yes.
Right. So, and I noticed that, as part of your duties as a controller, you do performance audits, and I know you've stated publicly in other realms of the interest in doing a performance audit on the school district. Can you give some perspective on the current state of that opportunity to review their information in more detail?
I think Superintendent Height would be interested in us doing more intensive audits. That's the sense I've gotten, but I don't think the SRC wants us to do that. And in fact, there was a vote at the SRC to try to strip us of the power to do some of the auditing that we already do. So they've had a history of being very kind of defensive and protective almost like they should audit and review themselves and not have to answer to anybody. So that's kind of consistent with that approach. I mean, one issue that has been a particular annoyance to me has been the non-transparency of the capital program, because when I came on the scene, the big issue was Vallis's recommendation that he was going to borrow $3 billion and build 75 schools in Philadelphia, and everything was going to be wonderful. Everybody was going to be in their own Microsoft school, and the schools were going to be round so that you'd be able to see all the way around the school, nobody would be able to ambush anybody, and it was just a dream. And we've had a hard time tracking down exactly what that spending was for, but a lot of it was for operational costs. It was not for what was sold. Basically, the school district is in a negative financial statement position by about $3 billion, just about by the same number as was touted as that borrowing. And as you know, just about every school building in Philadelphia is below code. They have major asbestos problems, they've got water problems, they've got sick building syndrome. They even had a problem earlier this year where the bathrooms they had floating human waste that couldn't be flushed and couldn't be fixed because they would only get janitorial service 1 day a week. So now there's a question about water and lead contamination. So I mean, every year we find, I'd say the operating side has been getting better since Height has been in. The school district has been paying more attention to spending money efficiently and to trying to accomplish their mission. There was a comment a few weeks ago that the school district's been billed $7 million for abusing grant money. Now, that was a major fight when we had back around 6 and 7. And again, Vallis's view was money is fungible. Money's money, and I don't care whether they put it in this grant or that grant. I'm going to use it for what I want. Well, you know, that's illegal. I mean, there are plenty of federal investigations pending on using money for outside the guidelines of what the money has been entrusted to you for. So now, the school district has actually been fortunate, because at one time I think there was a recommendation that they were going to have to pay $50 million in fines for misusing money that was being provided for school lunches.
Yeah.
So I would commend Height and what's his name? Matt Stansky and now Ori Monson for taking a firmer financial control of the financial reins. Still concerned about what happened with the capital spending and how is that going to hamper us with providing the kind of relief and corrections that should be made to school buildings. And based on long experience, am suspicious of the bunker mentality in the school district. Again, in one year, the school district changed their accounting so that items that used to be included in one definition in one column were now included in another column. Now, it's like changing the calendar every year. What is the point of doing that other than make it impossible to be reviewed? And council has really stepped up every year for the last 4 years to come up with the money that's necessary. They have a right to know how the money's being used.
I know my time's up. I have some additional questions, but I just want to follow up on that point. As you know, your office testified at the hearings that were held regarding a resolution ahead regarding concerns and issues regarding school infrastructure. You made reference to lead paint, and I definitely remember when Commissioner Vallis was here, some of the challenges that were identified in reference to the spending of capital dollars and how it's being spent. What would be the cost to do a performance audit of the school district?
There's so many aspects of the school district. It depends what particular item we would be doing a deep dive on. Most of the performance audits we do are in the range, well, when we use private consultants, they were in the range of about $80,000 for each performance audit. We have now philosophically shifted from using outside consultants to beefing up our staff, and we can perform those. So I don't think it's a per se question of cost anymore. The question would be how many performance audits can we do in a year? The number that I've used about $640,000 was used because the most intense forensic audit we ever did was at the sheriff's office, and that cost $640,000. So I knew that took 8 months, and that involved a check-by-check and a document-by-document review. So to me, that's kind of an outlier of if you get involved real deep in a very detailed audit, that might be what it... So what is this figure? So it would be about $160,000 worth of staff time a year to do a performance audit at the school district. And you're really not talking about one performance audit. One year you might look at how they handle transportation, and another year it might be how they do the lunch money, or it's almost a $2.3 billion budget. So to get valuable information, you're not going to do an overview of the whole budget. You're going to take a microscopic look at some aspect of it.
Just to conclude, considering you were able to identify about $2.2 billion in identified audit deficiencies and just reviewing their financial statements, it's pretty clear, considering the ongoing issues and concerns that I know this body and others have had regarding the school district, an ongoing annual performance audit should be done. I have some additional questions, and I'll ask them at the next round.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Before I get started, I want to say that politics aside sometimes, but your department, your staff are always informative, always on top of fiscal issues related to our city, and for that, I thank you all, and that's sincere. I'd like to just say that each year, when we have appropriated money for the school district, finally last year we had an accountability agreement that was signed off on, and I don't even know if it's worth the paper that we wrote on it, because they took the check, they cleared, and maybe filed it in the round file of their office for the accountability agreement. But if in some way we could have that enforced, if in some way we could have that looked at, we may get some of the answers that Councilman Green put forth. And so I'm just going to forward the agreement that we had.
Well, the point should be, we should be part of the memorandum of understanding. When Mayor Nutter, several years ago, when the school finances were out of control, he ballyhooed the fact that there was a memorandum of understanding and the city was going to look over the shoulders of the school district and make sure that they spent the money properly. And they never included us in that report, which meant that they didn't have any procedure for doing what they said. And then they appointed a committee that was supposed to review the school district's finances, and we later learned that the committee never met and never did anything. So again, it was a public relations device to calm everybody's nerves when people were panicking about the school district going broke. But there was, I mean, how would you penetrate a $2.3 billion budget? You have your technical staff who would not be able to do anything else. I mean, they would all have to become experts in areas of the school district budget, and then they'd be on the phone every day checking out what does this mean and what does that mean. I mean, the controller's office is basically the mechanism that you have available to you to do that kind of Even the Auditor General has to do 502 school districts a year. How could they possibly do the kind of detailed review that you're asking for? So we are available. We're willing to do it. I think we've got a very responsive relationship with council. We looked at NTI years ago at the request of council, and we sorted that all out.
But he'll ring my bell, so we agree.
Well, we might be working on the same theory.
So we agree that needs to be taken in a partnership way to task, and particularly as we look at what some of the, not just new capital projects, but some of the maintenance of some of the existing projects is going to be next year whenever, as we review reports. I think it's going to be huge. So we need that help, and I'm soliciting that help. What I want to talk about as well is outdoor advertising. We have a number of agreements based on public property, things that we auditing that relationship, and if we are we getting our fair share of the advertising dollars that SEPTA or concourse people or public right people who build the shelters, are we getting our fair share?
We haven't looked at that. We haven't looked at that, but that's a good idea. So we can put that on our list of performance audit ideas.
And particularly as we start to, these relationships start to expire and it is on council to renew those leases, it would be incumbent to see if we're getting, as a municipality, what we agreed to. No disrespect, I have 3 golf courses in my district. And I know that I was a freshman when we entered the contract. I know at some point real soon they're going to come back up. And I want to look at how we use our public assets to the benefit of the public, but also in part to our treasury, to make sure that we're not unfairly carrying an administrative load, an operation load that should be passed on to folk who clearly benefit from those kinds of relationships, whether it is an outdoor skating ring or whether it is a golf course in my district, whether it is SEPTA who uses that advertisement. Those are dollars, revenues that are supposed to come to us to offset expenses that we have. When these places catch on fire, where there's a crime committed, we respond promptly to 311, and I want to make sure that that is a reciprocal relationship.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning still.
Good morning.
Seems later than that. I want to start by echoing Councilman Jones's comments in terms of our working relationship, and it's really has been a pleasure to work with you and your staff, and I always find your reports to be very informative, information that helps guide us as members of council to do the job that we need to do. And so I really just wanted to thank you and your team for all of the hard work that you all do. I want to start with that.
Well, that feeling is reciprocal.
Oh, great. I had a quick question just from your testimony about the report regarding crime at recreation centers with surveillance cameras. And I'm very curious as to that report in particular. I did not see that one. And that's something that we work very hard on. I don't know if you recall, a few years ago, our office took work with every district member of council to make sure that there were surveillance cameras in every recreation center and playground in the city of Philadelphia over a 3-year period. And so I know that, we've worked hard to get these cameras in. So obviously very much of interest to me is what your report said about crime in these particular cameras that we had installed.
We've developed partnerships with several schools, and we take in about 7 or 8 students per term. And one of the projects is for them to pick an item of interest, and one of those teams wanted to see whether the cameras in their recreation center were actually functioning. Okay. So it's used as a learning aid about how do you do an audit, and then they all get personal recommendations for use in their college applications and so on. But we will be happy to forward. It's not a random sample or anything. It was focused, so it would be a concrete example for the kids about why auditing can be important in improving your life.
Sure. It's still very useful information for us to have. And the follow-up question, excuse me, the follow-up question to that is, once you determine that cameras are not working at a particular recreation center, and I know this is not your area of expertise especially, but once you have determined that there are cameras that are out, I'm assuming you forward that information onto the proper departments to make sure that they get working, that they get repaired or whatever it needs to be done.
Yeah, we forward that information to Parks and Recreation.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. The other question I had is, as you are aware, we introduced a resolution a few weeks ago about the Mentor Protege program that we're asking the city of Philadelphia to look into and to establish that other cities have already done. And I just wanted to, get your input on that. I know that you've done extensive work on that issue as well. And as we know, that the Mentor Protege program we think can be very helpful, particularly for people who are underutilized in construction in the city of Philadelphia, primarily African Americans, Latinos, women who have been, struggling and trying to break through for a very long time now. So I wanted to see what your input is on that.
Well, as you know, we've been working on this area for a long time.
Yes.
Councilman Good was a leader in council when we started down this path.
Yes.
John Thomas is our deputy for pre-audit, is the office expert on this. So.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, John.
John Thomas, pre-audit deputy. Councilwoman, as you know, I've been working with you and your staff on this issue.
Yes.
A number of cities have established these programs, and they seem to be working in these cities. The idea is that you have larger firms who have expertise and experience in areas that, say, smaller firms may not be. So we want to establish a structured relationship with the smaller firms so that they work with the larger firms on issues, particularly back office issues. It's not a matter necessarily of, in construction, for example, not to teach a company how to do construction necessary,
right,
but there's the back office, the billing, the estimating, those things where some of the smaller firms may need some help.
Yes.
And even moving from working in private construction to going into commercial, move from residential, going to commercial, public construction is a whole different ballgame. So larger firms can assist smaller firms, women and minority firms in that area. So I think the key for the successful mentor protege programs has been that it's structured. It's not just someone say we have a mentor protege program, but they're a structured program with reporting and those things built into that model.
Okay. And boy, that bell comes fast, I'll tell you. But as far as it being structured, I agree. Obviously we need to have, as much help as possible to help build capacity, for folks that we're trying to make sure are going to be successful once they arrive at the door. So, but I have more questions. I'll come back around on my second round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. The chair recognizes Councilman Taltenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Butkovitz, I admire your work on behalf of the city, your passion, which you serve. It is a little bit of a role reversal today as we question your budget. But I reviewed your budget, and I don't have any questions for your office, but while you're here, I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you what you think overall of the city's budget and where you think savings could be made.
I mean, that's hard to do at this stage. We do the review every year of the 5-year plan, and that is already underway. Our last view was that there was some precariousness over the next couple of years about some of the assumptions that were submitted in the last Nutter 5-year plan. We were concerned about there being some thin margin on the fund balance. PICA didn't agree with us. Other than that, the budget is really a policy matter for council. I mean, we just try to make sure that the numbers add up and that the city is not going to run into a deficit over it. So, I mean, that's the only concern is.
I just want to learn from your expertise. You're here. You're before us. I mean, I'm not going to let you just disappear into the woodwork. $400 million. Are you concerned at all about how the administration has described the ideas of spending the $400 million?
$400 million on what?
Well, the overall increase in spending.
No, I mean, one of the issues over time has been kind of deferred maintenance and neglect of things that are eventually going to come due. That's our whole infrastructure problem.
Correct.
The playgrounds, we've done many reports on this, just as Councilman Bass has been on it, are dangerous for kids because you got protruding metal bars and you have all sorts of problems. So in past years, the city has cut back on short-term operating costs. That's why you have potholes. That's why I think this administration has come in with the idea that people expect the city They expect to walk out of their house into a safe environment, not get a flat tire in a pothole, and have things fixed within a reasonable time. So, you know, I mean, the thing that we are, you know, AVI has given the city an extraordinary expansion in its borrowing capacity, right? So the city was just about at its borrowing limit, and because AVI multiplied the value of the real estate in the city by 10, the city now has the power to borrow $1 billion a year over the next 10 years if they want to. The mayor has assured us that he's not going to recommend any kind of borrowing that doesn't come accompanied with revenues that will pay the debt service. But that is simply a promise by this mayor. It's
Right.
nothing that is in concrete or in law. So I guess our structural concern is over the course of the 10 years, there might be a temptation to take advantage of the borrowing power. So if the city hypothetically was going to borrow $10 billion over the next 10 years, we would more than double our debt, and we would be increasing our annual debt service under current low interest rate by about $250 million a year. So at a time when everybody is talking about a $650 million a year payment to the pension fund, the one thing you don't want to do is, like the doctors say, first do no harm. So you don't want to increase that by a third by thinking that that's free money. Now, in the current environment, I haven't seen any indication that anybody is thinking like that, but you have all sorts of potential disasters over the horizon, such as a failure of the state to come to terms with the school funding crisis. And it's going to require, I think, a resolve and an understanding for fiscal discipline to not take advantage of that credit card if the other players don't step up to the plate and do what they're supposed to fund our essential services. So,
Mr. Butkovitz, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'm finished.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Two questions. The first, could you give me your thoughts on the pending conclusion of the PICA portion of the wage tax in 2023? What does that do to the Philadelphia budget?
You probably have me on that one. I don't know offhand what the PICA, how much of the wage tax is going to PICA right now.
So it's not the portion that's coming to the, let me clarify my question, I'm sorry. The authorized portion of the PICA, the wage tax for PICA will conclude in 2023, meaning that if it is not renewed somehow, and not that it should be, maybe it should be, but that is about $350 million per year to the city, which would disappear.
Well, you know the history of these things, including the Johnstown flood sales tax, is that taxes get renewed when they come up for expiration. That's what happened with the 1% on the city sales tax. And the city is kind of painted into a corner right now with its almost total reliance on real estate taxes. There's been a general idea that they're much lower than the suburbs, but there's a reason for that. Not only the property values, but the fact that the people who live in Philadelphia don't have the kind of incomes that people in the suburbs do have. So the fact that I think the city is going to be forced to look at a variety of options for revenues because there's no reason to believe that costs are going to stop in the future. It's hard to speculate on what the situation will be in 2023, but if there's a tax that is expiring, that usually attracts the eye of policymakers.
Yeah, it's a concern, I believe, because we are now being asked to vote on taxes, borrowing bonds that will be affected by the fact that we're doing a 5-year plan, so we're only looking from 2016 to 2021 or whatever, but a couple of years after that, there's a big gaping hole, and I know that our city finance folks say that they're going to work on this starting next year, but it's hard for me to figure out how to vote properly if I don't see that there is a plan B to how we are going to pay down our pension debts and do everything else if we're going to be absent an amount of money. And me personally, I have said many times to the disagreement of many that I like to see that portion of the wage tax disappear. I think, it's good to have that tax disappear. There may be a need for some additional taxes, but anyway, that is something that maybe I could talk with you about later. Let me ask you then, I had a conversation here with Commissioner Ross, and it was just a conversation. I'd like your thoughts on this. We talked about drones, and it was kind of reported as a cost saving, but my interest is in more effective city services for emergency responders, for police, for sheriff, for L&I, in the sense that I wonder what the costs are when there's a false alarm and we have engines and ladders rushing someplace. And I think they should rush. I don't think they should wait, but if a drone could be sent over, and if it's a false alarm, they could go back to the station. Similarly, whether it's apprehending fugitives or if you had a drone providing some eyes and possibly ears on the location. If it is a police emergency and a drone is sent there and there's no emergency, or if there's an ability for L&I to do inspections of tall buildings, bridges, and whatnot with the drones. I see a lot of opportunities for the city to do a better job, and by the way, also to de-escalate some tensions because, for example, with the police department sending drones in, helping to patrol, going into places ahead of the police officer, may be life-saving, may reduce costs. But it is a controversial area because people are concerned about their civil rights, although the drones would be, outside in public areas. Is there some report that you can do about the costs and things like that?
Well, we have a meeting scheduled May 23rd with stakeholders on drones. We're very enthusiastic about the potential. We've explored it already in an area that we've kind of specialized in, building inspections. We've seen efforts by rescue agencies in New Jersey where they didn't do it through drones, they did it through mounted cameras where they can determine what is a less congested route for an ambulance. I think there's all sorts of potential there. I think the privacy concerns are always there, but as you point out, as a matter of law, whatever you do in public is not private. So, you can't go looking in people's windows and into their private spaces, but people on the street, that's fair game.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Controller, and one of the findings of the Anchor Procurement Initiative report is that we need a two-way communication between the manufacturers and the purchasers of goods. The Department of Industry and Manufacturing is currently working on a database for manufacturers right now, currently. What sort of information should they include that will be helpful for manufacturers?
Well, it's going to depend on the purchaser. Right now, we're working with a number of the hospitals on the creation of a medical laundry in Philadelphia. So in that situation, what you want to know are what are the specifications of the product or service that the purchaser needs. They need to, they need absolute guaranteed delivery every morning. They're going to have certain specification regarding sanitary conditions that they may not require in regular law. They're going to have an extraordinary capacity to provide that, and so on and so forth. The idea is to create a database and a communication base so that you're not doing what they used to do in shop classes when I went to school, which is they taught you for professions that didn't exist for the last 20 or 30 years. You want to be right up to date and make sure that the real live potential customers that you have are going to find it within their standards to buy the service or the product that you're providing.
And have you been speaking with, or have you consulted with the Office of Industry and Manufacturing?
Yes. Yeah.
Recently, so it'd be nice to collaborate as they're building their database now, so we could, I guess, narrow down specific information that we could provide to institutions that will be beneficial for them for using local procurement, or at least working towards more of a local procurement policy. Now, are there policies that we can put into place to further incentivize our local network here to use local manufacturing and in procurements? Can we do something in a policy matter with the
I
city?
think there's a genuine interest on the part of the meds and eds to do that. They recognize it as something that will be important in making sure that the environment they live in is upwardly mobile. I think after we get some concrete results in that area, the next step will be to try to get city government and other large businesses, Comcast, Aramark, other large Philadelphia businesses to agree to the same kind of approach. We are working with another group, was it ICIC? Which has a specific focus on helping to cultivate inner city businesses and grow them from this about a $2 million size to a $20 million size. The chief executive talks about one business that went from a street vendor sale of hair products into a $20 million a year. It's like an $800 million business manufacturing and distributing those products, and they went through their training program and through their access to New York capital markets. So I think there's going to be a multi-layered strategy. For the 8 years I've been in here, I think the access to capital is a major problem for all kinds of Philadelphia businesses. So they're going to have to be initiatives so that people can grow businesses that have demonstrated that they know how to do their operational task, but they don't have all the components necessary. You know, when we talked about demolition contracts and construction, for example, the $1 million bond requirement is a major bar to the growth of small demolition and minority demolition companies, because they would need $1 million in cash that they really could put aside in order to do this deal, and they're just not that big. So you don't start big, so you can't get big.
And I agree. You know, recently, I think over the last year and a half, 2 years, you know, having more of a centralized office that's collaborating and working together for better services, you know, trying to work specific packages or profiles towards an individual manufacturing to help incentivize them, and not incentivize in a way, just give them a better opportunity to share in what we have to offer here as a market share in the city of Philadelphia. But I guess we should be starting with looking to try to incentivize larger scale purchases that are across the board, that has the the commonalities of the report.
Well, most of these large
purchases.
I mean, we for example, we met with the vice president of Comcast, and I think that they've got active programs. They would like to do local procurement. They would like to do upwardly mobile procurement. The problem that they have is breaking through the bureaucratic regimen in their company where a deal has been made at a higher level than them that they're going to procure from certain producers. And the second one is to guarantee that they're going to have reasonable price parity and quality parity with the suppliers that they're going to be displacing.
Well, I mean, they're corporate decisions, and national corporate decisions, which I believe frustrates a lot of local businesses, and then I think the city as a whole. I mean, we're talking about for the first time in a long time, especially with your report and, you know, the refocusing in on, you know, Workshop of the World and our local businesses, giving, you know, at different levels, the scale of opportunities. And, you know, I think we should be looking to bring it back home here and to keep it here. You know, there's no reason we should be buying products in Jersey, all right, when Jersey's trying to attract, you know, our local businesses, you know, 3 miles, $3 million, all right, to move, you know, vacating, you know, residents here out of the opportunity to go to work right in our own neighborhoods. So, you know, I'd be interested
Yeah, we very much would like to...
in moving forward with trying to think of what we can do on scale.
Well, we really appreciate the leadership and the strategic vision you've had on the Delaware waterfront, and what people thought nothing could be done with, you've had a different view. So you've been highly effective on that, and we would love to partner with you on it.
You know, I think you have a good base foundation right there that we could work upon. My last question before I turn it over is, last year, I mean, you were talking about demolitions and everything several times in your conversations here and testimony. Last year, you released a report on vacant buildings with open violations. Do you have a cost estimate in terms of inspections, repairs, administration, and court costs versus the demolition? So if you have that cost analysis, would it be beneficial for the city just to demolish them? And giving local people the opportunity to
I don't
to bid and
have
go to
that
work on that?
I think, you know, as a generalization, it's about $20,000 per building to do a demolition. But we'll get back to you with more precise.
Okay, well, you can provide that to the chair.
Yeah.
All right, chair recognizes Councilman Dunn.
Thank you, Chairman Heenan. Just another question, but it's really asking your opinion on something, and that is the mayor's initiatives, which I think everyone agrees are great initiatives with the new budget. And I would like to know your opinion on, one, what you think of this potential soda tax or sugary drink tax, and two, if not that, what alternatives would you recommend to us?
See, now, the one thing that you did do is you helped me win a bet with my first deputy. I thought somebody would ask that question, and he didn't think so.
Thank you.
The first thing I'll say is, I mean, the mayor has a great vision in terms of what he wants to accomplish with pre-kindergarten. I mean, all the research and everything. I think for too often mayors have kind of deferred delving into education because it's such a thankless task, and he really does seem to have a commitment to doing something about changing the embedded poverty problem. My personal philosophy on these kinds of taxes is that taxes are things that we pay as dues to live in a civilized society, and that they ought to be generalized, because the concern is at a certain level, it really tilts the scales industry by industry. So during the Nutter administration, we had an issue with the agreement that was made on stormwater fees, because, again, there was a laudable objective. The mayor signed on to a $6 billion environmental enhancement program to improve the handling of stormwater, but on 500 businesses, the rates went up from $700 a month to $4,000 a month. At the Arco refinery, they went up by $384,000 a month. And that's why it's really painfully necessary for the city to have a broader range of options in how it pays for this, because since the Rendell administration, the mantra has been we can't have the wage tax, because that stigmatizes Philadelphia as the only big city with that kind of disincentive, and it drives businesses into the suburbs. And so now the wage tax has been ensconced in a position where you have to have a financial emergency and you need a special vote in Harrisburg in order to touch it, so you're really left with only the real estate tax. And as the mayor pointed out, they've gone to the well several times over the last few years. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a survey around the country about revenue options and see if we can contribute anything constructive on possible alternatives or supplements. I think the mayor's kind of stuck in having a vision and wanting to do these initiatives that are important and having his hands tied by Harrisburg on what he can do for revenue. So I sympathize with the position. I certainly wouldn't want to see him lose on his pre-kindergarten or I think those are valuable initiatives. And, for our perspective, we're going to see if we can find some way that maybe that can be done easier. And I have no idea where that survey is at this point. We just started it.
Those recommendations, by the way. Thank you. I'm glad you won the bet.
Thank you, Councilman. The chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
I'm not sure you answered it.
That's why I'm supposed to get out of here fast.
I said, so what did he say?
Well, what he should say is, you know what, I don't have a vote. on AVS, and then get out.
I'm going to relinquish my time based on that. I kid you not.
Well, the problem was I had one line of vision with Ellen Dumm and Debbie Mahler, so.
Yeah, I know. That's what it was. I was like waiting for the answer to come down. No, I'm going to pass a little bit.
All right, well, good job, Councilman. The chair now recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Councilman. Appreciate it. I have a question about your Fraud and Special Investigations Division. And can you give a little bit of detail in terms of how that differs, the work differs from what happens with the Inspector General? And the reason I'm asking this is because I have really a very specific area of focus that I'm thinking of, which is a lot of the contracts that happen here in the city of Philadelphia, where you have, general contractors, prime contractors, who go into an agreement with the city of Philadelphia, who say that they have, that they're using, someone of color or minority. They use, whatever their number is that determines that they are actually on the job, and they have never used this firm or person or whatever. There are no repercussions, and it doesn't seem as if anyone has picked up the ball on this, whether it's the Inspector General or it's your Fraud and Special Investigations Division. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, first of all, the Inspector General has limited jurisdiction. They can only look at departments under the mayor's direct control, whereas we have general jurisdiction.
Okay.
Secondly, while it's regarded as an asset that we have a leader in the Inspector General's office out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal investigation system operates in they kind of are able to devote enormous resources over long periods of time to get high-profile targets.
Sure.
So there are federal investigations that go on for 5 years. We did an audit of the sheriff's office, and it resulted in an indictment 5 years after the report, whereas the DA's office and the local authorities have to do more of a quick and dirty kind of response. So when you're dealing with large volumes of information, we think we are better able to deal with that. And our major target is not to get a prosecution. It is to identify something that the city could do better and to change the policy. So as to your specific question, John Thomas is engaged with your staff right now in trying to develop metrics and a system for doing exactly what you've suggested by identifying some of the other major contractors and doing a deep dive, as we did with Bach Construction a couple of years ago, which John pioneered, to determine whether or not they're being truthful in
Right.
their claims about minority contracting.
Right. And it seems and we appreciate John and all of his hard work, and I want to thank you specifically for working with our office to make these things happen. But it becomes very, very frustrating when you see case after case after case where the same thing happens over and over again. And again, nobody seems to pick up the mantle. But, we look forward to correcting that and to changing that. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wanted to follow up on some questions that Councilman Parker and also Councilman Heenan asked regarding your analysis and ideas regarding pensions. Wanted to get some perspective on, from your research and analysis, what you've seen in other jurisdictions who've looked at pension buyout concepts. I know there's an upcoming Pennsylvania Public Employee Retirement System Conference or Papers Conference. Wanted to get some perspective on that as well. If there's been any conversation that you've seen in other jurisdictions, either in the Commonwealth or other parts of the country.
Well, Illinois is exploring a buyout, and the city of Nashville considered it and decided not to do it. And there's a small city in Florida. What city? A small city in Florida that I think implemented it. The conversation is generally circled around this idea about should there be defined benefit pensions, should there be 401ks, and I think that kind of misses the point because the 401k doesn't even save any money to the employer unless there's an agreement that the employer is going to contribute less than they're contributing to the defined benefit. We had some nervous moments this year in the stock market, but they came back. The management of these pension funds by sophisticated managers has a much better track record, both in minimizing losses and in making the kind of money that's going to be necessary for us to make to pay our pensioners than does 401ks. And there's a looming national scandal over that. People borrow prodigiously from their 401k problems. One of the problems that we need is people need to almost be forced to save for retirement because it's like borrowing against your insurance policy. But if you borrow against your 401k and you retire, you are broke. And that doesn't happen to people under the defined benefit system. So I'm happy to have the conversation take place outside of what I consider to be those irrelevant. All during the last 8 years, the city debated this question about whether they should replace the city pension plan with a 401k. They finally developed a pilot project in the sheriff's office and the police department. Nobody would join it. They finally forced people into the program. At a time when every minute counts and every dollar counts, it's just an expensive distraction to get into that debate. So I'm happy now that we're at least confronting the issue about how are we going to pay for what we've already committed to, and is there a way that might be mutually beneficial, both to the pensioners and to the city, to try to reduce those liabilities.
My time is up, but I do have a follow-up question.
That was the Diocese of Palm Beach in Florida, is the other small city.
I do have another question I'll ask in the next round, but as I wrap up this round, I want to follow up some questions and comments that Councilman Bass had made regarding just the challenges we've seen in reference to procurement, especially in reference to providing opportunities for businesses, especially businesses of color in the city. From my observation, from my years of working in this building, there really has not been that level of real, let's say, stick approach. There has been conversations and meetings and discussions, but not really getting to that level of enforcement until the work that your office did, especially working with John Thomas in that regard, regarding Bach and the debarment process. So I'm curious, what has been the relationship between your office and OEO and procurement, especially as it comes to enforcement matters?
I think the relationship has been improving, especially as of late, and with the new...
John, can you state your name for the record, please?
Sorry. John Thomas, pre-audit deputy controller. Relationship with OEO and the controller's office has been improving. We operate independently in terms of our enforcement activities. Because all contracts are tied to money and our pre-audit function, we can trace the money. That's how we have the power to do what we do. And so we try to work in conjunction with them, and we do when we can. And if we find that they are not doing what they need to do in terms of monitoring and enforcing contracts and compliance, we work independently of them. But the new Commerce Director has sort of given the OEO a charge to work in conjunction with us to try to improve compliant monitoring and enforcement. As Councilwoman Bass mentioned, she and her staff and I are talking about ways to look at contracts on monitoring and enforcement. But monitoring and enforcement is very important because you can have all the rules, and the City of Philadelphia has lots of rules related to minority, diversity, and inclusion. But it's the enforcement of those rules that's important. And if you don't enforce them, it really doesn't mean anything. It makes nice paper, but it doesn't really mean anything.
And I just to conclude, I agree. It seems like between your work and the controller's work, you're much more proactive in using that data to bring about change. Where it seems, from my observation, I do hope it's going to change under direction of Commerce Director Epps and Nolan Atkinson. But historically, OEO and before that, MBEC is much more reactive and just receives data, but doesn't really do anything with the data.
I agree.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you. And I just have two last questions for you. One, have you done an audit on the city's First Source program? Are you familiar with that? Which is under the Commerce Department, I believe?
No.
Okay, all right. And that's something that we could talk about and discuss a little bit further. Philacor, which is something that was listed in your testimony, that you have done an audit, and I'm curious to know the results of that audit and how productive it is. This is a program that is actually within the City of Philadelphia prisons, in which they work to make sure that they have actual skills that they can use to gain employment once they leave the facility. So can you talk a little bit about your findings?
Yeah, the findings there was that the program was a valuable program and that operationally it worked very well, but that there were routine issues dealing with the handling of cash that they needed help with. And that, for example, and there are issues that city departments have routinely been criticized by us for. Things like not having the same person do the deposits as pays the bills. It's something to have two people check on how the money's being handled. It was a relatively small amount of cash on hand, and there was no finding of fraud or anything like that, but they need to get basic financial controls.
So it's more of a matter of just internal controls and procedures?
Yes.
But no missing money kind of
Right.
thing? Okay,
Right.
all right. All right, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
All the money was accounted for. But,
Okay,
yeah.
great. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I don't see any further questioning. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one other quick follow-up. What has been the performance? I know you do performance audits, various city departments. I'm curious about your performance audits on both OEO, procurement, as well as OPA. We've had an engaged conversation in this budget process about the CAMA system, and I'm curious about the performance audits you've done on OEO, procurement, and OPA, especially in reference to the CAMA system.
They're on the list, but we haven't done any recent performance audits of those agencies.
Okay.
I have to admit that my heart skips a beat every time I hear Councilman Green called out. It's trying to adjust to the new regime.
And when do you anticipate doing performance audits of those departments?
Within a year? It's probably going to be scheduled for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
How are you? Thank you very much for the work that you've done. I have a very simple follow-up question to Councilman Green's, which is very similarly, I'm curious about whether you take a look at the capital budget for OIT, and in part because OIT's capital budget often incorporates big picture projects that sometimes have taken longer than projected to come to fruition. And I'm not sure if that's something that's ever been a reviewable process, but they'll handle big issues like payroll, and to some extent, I think the build-up to the CAMA is supposed to come under OIT. And pensions, One Philly, other types of things that have gone on for a long time, and just curious about where you are with OIT.
Well, we've, at the beginning of my tenure, we looked at the Oracle program, and we were pretty detailed in our criticism of that, and we have found that to be basically a guide to the city's technology problems. They constantly buy bits and pieces. Yeah. And similarly, we did a review of the surveillance cameras. So we've come at OIT from the outside, and the response to all of those audits has been kind of a depressing response on the part of the city, because the ultimate point was that they needed to invest a lot more money to do what they thought they were trying to do than they were going to be able to accomplish with those resources. I'd been told that there had been an initial plan to spend over $100 million in technology upgrades that was sidelined by the 2008 recession. So all through our review of L&I, every time we pointed out that the Hansen system was one that could be rewritten over, or one that had no controls over it, we were advised that the Eclipse program would solve all those problems. Now we hear that the Eclipse program is probably at least a year away from implementation, and it will not fit the contours of what's needed. It's the same story over and over again. The city basically hasn't really allocated money for major technological upgrades, so they're putting Band-Aids on the existing systems. So we could do another detailed report that I think would probably show the same thing, but we feel going in, we're able to accomplish more in smaller bites over a variety of departments than taking on that whole OIT problem, unless there's clearly going to be a commitment to make a very major investment in it.
I guess maybe we can follow this up a little bit separately, but one of the responses I might suggest is also that some projects within OIT actually do get funded fairly robustly, and they still struggle to come in on time. But I would love to be able to follow up with you, because I think that there might be, rather than looking at it as individual project by project, I'm curious about the overall kind of capital time frame for those kinds of capital investments within the department to better understand it.
That would
Thank
be
you.
helpful if you gave us.
That's it.
That's it. Councilman Jones and Councilman Gill, one day. Am I done?
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other members have any questions for the Controller in his office? Well, being none, Controller and your staff, thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for coming here today.